Deception and slavery in war and peace. The world has been deceived, with people becoming consensual slaves in matters of war and peace. We are about to peek into history to review how this has happened and look at the beginnings of a remedy. The focus of this presentation will be on the Federated Commonwealth of Australia, but many other countries will benefit from learning this knowledge. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Stephen Spires and the ARC research team for their tenacity in gaining this knowledge. Stephen Spires has written a series of white papers that helped me start to see this hidden world. The white papers can be found at www.stephenspires.com. Our story begins with the Roman Catholic Church and what they claim they have right to. A papal bull is a formal document issued by a Roman pontiff upon a major act of law or claim to extend the power of the Church over its claimed domination of the world, all nations, all people, all laws, and all religions. A papal tiara or triregnum is a three-tiered jeweled papal crown and symbol of claimed papal supremacy since the 16th century. In 1302, Pope Boniface VIII issued his infamous papal bull, Unam Sanctam, being the first express trust claiming control over the whole planet and effectively king of the world. The first crown on the papal tiara is representation of Crown land. The first testamentary trust through a deed and will creating a deceased estate was made under Pope Nicholas V in 1455 through the papal bull Romanus Pontifex. This bull had the effect of conveying the right of use of the land as real property from the express trust Unam Sanctam to the control of the pontiff and his successors in perpetuity. Hence all land is claimed as Crown land. The first crown is represented by the first trust created when a child is born, depriving them of all their beneficial entitlements and rights on the land at birth. The second crown on the papal tiara is representation of the Commonwealth. The second crown was created in 1481 with the papal bull Aeterni Regis, meaning eternal crown, by Pope Sixtus IV being only the second of three papal bulls as deeds of testamentary trusts. This second crown is represented by the second SESTA-QV trust, created when a child is born, being the sale of the birth certificate as a bond to the private central bank of the nation, depriving them of ownership of their flesh and condemning them to perpetual servitude as a Roman person or slave. The third crown on the papal tiara is representation of the ecclesiastical see. The third crown was created in 1537 by Pope Paul III through the papal bull Convocation, also meant to open the Council of Trent, being the third and final testamentary deed and will of the testamentary trust, being the trust set up for the claiming of all lost souls, lost to the Holy See. The third crown is represented by the third SESTA-QV trust, created when a child is baptized, being the grant of baptismal certificate by the parents to the church or registrar, being the gift of title of the soul. Thus, without legal title over one's own soul, a man or woman may be legally denied the right to stand as a people, but may be treated as a creature and thing without legally possessing a soul. Hence, the Bar Association is able to legally enforce maritime law against men and women, because they can be treated as things, cargo that does not possess a soul. As we can see via these papal bulls, the Vatican has claimed ownership of the world, everyone's life, and everyone's soul. These claims, never being successfully rebutted, are some of the most important claims that still exist in our current world. In the 16th century, the Roman Catholic Church was the main church in England, as well as many other kingdoms in Europe. The Roman Catholic Church required all Bibles to be written in Latin, and the Church proclaimed anyone attempting a translation of the Bible into a common tongue to be a heretic. During this time, each town generally had one priest that would baptize, marry, hear confessions, and provide the last rites to everyone in the town. This priest would also be the only one that could read the Bible, as it was in Latin. The churches preached that the only way to salvation was through the Catholic Church, and that one soul could be saved through donations. The Church, as a powerful political entity, had been influencing land rights, successions, even wars for centuries, and by aligning themselves with the Protestant cause, these nobles gained greater autonomy and power. Over the centuries in this position, the Church ended up owning over 1/3 of the land in Europe, and the Pope claimed authority over all the kings of Europe, as the successor to the Roman Emperor. This made the Church one of the most powerful institutions on the continent. The Roman Catholic Church had its own administrational laws, known as Roman canon laws. These laws are made up of statute laws, policies, and mandates that one must follow, harming or penalizing you if you don't, and anyone connected to the Church was expected to follow these laws. As we can see, the Church was a powerful entity at the time that was involved in governance and imposed heavy taxes on kings, lords, and peasants alike. This oppression of the people caused the Protestant Reformation during the years 1517 to 1648. King Henry VIII extirpated the Catholic Church of Rome in 1539. This set the Pope aside as head of any church within England, ordering sheriffs across the realm to remove the Catholic from any role within the realm. This started the Church of England. By founding the Church of England, Henry VIII had created a realm in accordance with the Holy Scriptures, and extirpated the head of the Catholic Church in England. By founding the Church of England, he had become Archbishop to the Church and cut the head of Rome throughout the realm under his crown. Catholics had land taken from them, were banished from the realm, hung from bell towers by bell ropes, and some hung, drawn, and quartered. The Pope would no longer have control over all of England. Henry VIII had commissioned the creation of the Tudor imperial crown, with it being first described in 1521. In 1604, King James I authorized theologians to produce the King James Authorized Version of the Bible. The Catholic Church was not happy about having an English translation of the Bible, as the commoner would be able to read its teachings. So in 1605, they commissioned Guy Fawkes to assassinate King James I, in what has become known as the Gunpowder Plot. This assassination attempt failed, and the King James Authorized Version of the Bible was completed in 1611. This was known as the King James Version 1611 and received the royal seal from King James I to proclaim the book as a law book. What followed was the 30-Year War from 1618 to 1648 and cost an estimated 8 million lives. The main cause of this war was the religious tension between the Roman Catholics and the Protestant Christians, and what faith would sit at the core of a realm. A realm is just another word for a kingdom, with a kingdom that grows to consist of several countries or peoples becoming known as an empire. Kingdoms are ruled by a monarch, but where does a monarch get their authority from? Well, all authority ultimately leads back to God as the creator of everything. The monarch sits through a coronation and takes an oath to God and the kingdom through the faith to uphold the laws of God. At this coronation is a spiritual observer who presides over the coronation, where a literal stake of claim to a land for a people is made. In the United Kingdom, this spiritual observer has been the Archbishop of Canterbury as the leader of the Church of England, and the Holy Scripture used has been the King James Bible 1611. The monarch takes an oath of allegiance to God to uphold the laws of God, with these laws of God being the faith of the realm. As the monarch takes an oath of allegiance to grant them authority, so must everyone else. People in public office take an oath of allegiance to the monarch, and through the monarch and their oath to God, they are granted the authority to perform their role in office. Examples would be politicians and police officers. Loyal subjects to the crown, who would like to enjoy the protections that that crown offers, also take an oath of allegiance to the crown. King Charles I believed in divine right and tried to govern without the consent of Parliament. Charles started to gather forced taxes from his subjects and imprison anyone who refused to pay. The Parliament was angry he was taking taxes without approval of Parliament, and that he was imprisoning people without trial. This gave rise to the Petition of Right in 1627. This document was intended to stop a monarch from collecting unjust taxes, imprisoning people without cause, and preventing martial law in a time of peace. In 1688, James II was the King of England. James was Catholic and demanded that the Church of England read the Declaration of Indulgence in church, essentially giving the Catholic faith equal power with the Church of England in the realm. The English Church refused and invited William of Orange to England. William travelled to England and issued the Declaration of the Hague to restore the Protestant faith in England. King James was in opposition, but James's daughter, as well as officers and soldiers, had walked from James's side to William's side to maintain the faith within the realm. James fled and escaped to France, and William and Mary were crowned King and Queen of England. They took a new coronation that bound the monarchs to the Parliament and the law. This event was known as the Glorious Revolution, as there was no blood shed, and was the catalyst for the birth of the Bill of Rights 1688. This document laid out a set of individual rights that not even a monarch could overturn, and prohibited any Catholic monarch from taking the throne within the realm. King William later passed the Act of Settlement 1700 to prevent anyone within the monarch's lineage that is a Catholic from taking coronation and sitting on the throne within the imperial Protestant realm. From 1775 to 1783, the American Revolutionary War happened in the United States of America. This saw the United States fight against the United Kingdom's forces. Wars cost money, and both sides borrowed money from the World Bank. The World Bank getting its roots from the Tuscan banks in the 12th and 13th centuries, who were wealthy families that would lend money to monarchs and the Vatican. The Medici family, becoming a major player in the 15th century, were the first to borrow from the wealthy Vatican and lend out to monarchs, with products such as credit, bills of exchange, and trusts being developed throughout the centuries. This essentially allowed the Vatican to make countries, kingdoms, and empires indebted to it via these banking families that would eventually turn into what we know today as the World Bank. In 1812, America saw another war that lasted another 2 years, from 1812 to 1814. Again they warred against the United Kingdom, and again both sides borrowed money from the World Bank. This war led to the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, that finally saw peace between the two sides. This treaty also had both sides pledge to work towards abolishing forced slavery, with consensual slavery still accepted. Both the United States and the United Kingdom were suffering the burdens of war after borrowing money to pay for their wars. We then have the American Civil War happening from 1861 to 1865 with more money borrowed. This led to the World Bank seizing the United States of America during the 1860s. Later, martial law was imposed within the United States under the Rules of War, General Orders 100. The Libre Code was issued as a rule book to the occupying force, being the United States military. Now, we have the United States of America under administration because they defaulted on their war debts and the United States military being controlled by this foreign administration put in place by the world banks. This gives a whole new view on what the military-industrial complex is. The Anglican Church of Australia was the dominant church in the Commonwealth, using the King James Bible 1611 as the Holy Scripture of the church, with its roots found in the Church of England. In 1896, Pope Leo VIII issued a papal bull called Apostolicae Curae, which declared all Anglican church orders to be absolutely null and utterly void. During the Federation of the Commonwealth of Australia, the country was involved in the Second Boer Wars in South Africa. This war raged from 1899 to 1902. Initially, the land forces were sent out as individual contingents from self-governing colonies, but with Federation becoming one land force of the Commonwealth of Australia. The flag the land forces fought under was the Federal Red Ensign, with this flag sitting in the Armoury. The Armoury is the land forces of a country, as the Admiralty is the sea forces. These were the Commonwealth's creational fathers, as the first imperial force to defend the Federation. This Federation, being the creation of an indissoluble trust left to the people of the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth of Australia Estate, held and owned by the Australian Imperial Crown Kingdom. The Crown in this statement is the people, so it can be said the Commonwealth of Australia Estate, held and owned by the Australian Imperial People's Kingdom. Queen Victoria allowed royal assent to this new estate, making her the mother of our father's estate. Now this estate has a management document, being the will and testament, left to us in an indissoluble trust via our inheritance. This management document being the De Jure Constitution, UK 1900, 9th of July Constitution. This is the document to be followed when managing our father's estate. This document enshrined in secular law via the preamble and section 116 under the Holy Scriptures in the King James Bible 1611. Secular law is the liberty to live freely and self-determined in our father's estate. This estate was created under Queen Victoria's reign, and therefore within the realm that she took coronation to. Queen Victoria took oath to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, under the Imperial Crown, with a faith based on the King James Bible 1611. Through Queen Victoria, the Commonwealth inherited all of this. We used Queen Victoria's coat of arms and royal ensign, we got issued a Great Seal to give royal assent to laws, and we continue to use the same naval ensign on warships in commission. The country was officially federated on the 1st of January 1901, and Australia celebrated this day as Federation Day until 1937. The first Commonwealth Parliament was opened in Melbourne, Victoria on the 9th of May 1901. Also during 1901, Australia had a competition to choose a government flag that would sit in the Admiralty. As can be seen on this old publication, the chosen design was based on the federal land flag that sits in the Armoury and the one the Boer War fathers fought under, with the only difference being the size in the flags. The red land flag was a 3:2 ratio, while the new blue government flag and civil merchant flag for use on the waters would be a ratio of 2:1. The National Admiralty flag, adopted from the Federal Armoury flag. The winning design sent to the King for approval, and in 1903 King Edward VII issued a royal warrant authorising the Commonwealth of Australia to fly a slightly adjusted version of the flag in open water, a blue flag to fly on government ships and a red flag to fly on civil merchant ships. In 1906, a coat of arms was designed for use in Australia and warranted in Royal Style and Titles 1908. In 1907, a Hague Convention was held, and Hague IV, War on Land, was written up. King Edward VII signed into this treaty, and so the realm fell under administration as the United States had in the 1860s. A country so young had been captured before it could spread its wings. After the 1907 Hague Convention, the Great White Fleet sailed around the world, visiting various locations for a week at a time. We can see in the Libre Code that the presence of a hostile army proclaims its martial law without official proclamation needed. This U.S. naval fleet was part of the World Bank's administration's military arm, and this naval fleet was now traveling the world declaring martial law in every country that it stopped at. All these countries now fell into the World Bank's administration, and martial law was now enforced. In 1908, the two Australian flags to be flown in open waters was changed under Admiralty orders. This done post-Hague Convention was new flags representing the administrator. These flags were not legislated until the 1953 Flags Act, but just sat in the background for 40 years. Worth noting is the fact that flags are not normally legislated. If we look at the Hague IV War on Land document on the Australian government's website, we see that this document came into force on the 26th of January 1910. This is the official day the Commonwealth of Australia became an occupied country, bringing Admiralty law over our common law courts. It is also what we have come to learn as Australia Day, but what we can really see is that we are celebrating Occupation Day. Australia Day was first celebrated in 1915 on the last Friday of July. Ali Wharton Kirk initiated the immensely successful Australia Day fundraising effort in 1915. All four of her sons and three of her brothers were involved in the war, and Ali started the day out of her love for her family and for her country, and for those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for us. The last Friday of July is the real Australia Day, and the day we should be honouring our forefathers who helped forge this Commonwealth in international waters. Interestingly, in 1912, Australia was warranted a second coat of arms post-Hague Convention 1907. What is strange about the second coat of arms is that it can be found registered in the World Intellectual Property Organization, but the first can't. There is an entire profession and college dedicated to royal protocol. The profession is called heraldry, and in the UK, the college is called the College of Arms. They are responsible for devising, granting, and describing armorial bearings, tracing genealogies, and determining and ruling on questions of rank and protocol. The College of Arms in England, through the Court of Chivalry, adheres to strict observation over the use of arms and has in the past ordered the removal of arms for usurpation of arms by a corporate entity. Throughout the 1900s, the Australian government created many stylized versions of the coat of arms and had them registered with the US Patents Office as well as the US Trademarks Office. This is strange as coats of arms are not normally registered, and changes to the coat of arms should go back to the College of Arms in England. The Great War occurred from 1914 to 1918, also known as World War I. 62,000 men that left our shores to defend the realm never returned. They gave up their today so we could have a tomorrow. The World War I Australian Imperial Forces were the founding fathers of their state left to the people of the Commonwealth, and delivered the blessing the Commonwealth was relying on to become a sovereign kingdom in its own right. This led to Prime Minister Billy Hughes halting the then King of the realm, George V, from speaking on behalf of the Commonwealth of Australia, constituted in its own right, by its own people, volunteering its own people to defend what was greater, the realm itself. At the Treaty of Versailles 1919, Billy Hughes spoke on behalf of the 62,000 dead men, self-proclaiming the Commonwealth of Australia's existence on a world stage. This is where the League of Nations was formed, with the Commonwealth of Australia becoming a signatory in its own right. In conferences after World War I, the Empire spread the costs of warfare among the Dominions. We can see by news reports in August of 1921 that the Commonwealth of Australia, along with Canada, were to take on 4.35% of the total debts of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. This led to the Debt Sinking Fund in 1923 being created by the then publicly run Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank at the time was to put half of its profits into the debt-sinking fund, with Billy Hughes trying to rally public support to help pay off the fund. In 1926, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland went through the Balfour Declarations and the Imperial Conferences, leading to Great Britain, Ireland, Australia, and Canada becoming separated. The Balfour Declaration divided what was once a realm into multiple realms, with heads of state issuing style and title to reflect that change. King George V displayed this by the separation of Great Britain from Ireland on his style and title 1927. The Commonwealth of Australia was once Dominion, but now had found itself sovereign and self-proclaimed on an international stage. The Commonwealth of Australia, now finding itself as a separate realm, laid down a foundation stone. The significance of laying down a foundation stone cannot be understated. By laying down this stone, a biblical land claim was made. To make a biblical land claim, a people must lay down a large, flat rock and watch the sun rise and set for 390 days, plotting the stars on the horizon at dawn and dusk. After the first year, the pattern will start to repeat itself. In 1862, Queen Victoria had the observatory in the King's Domain built, with the stars being observed since then. As per the preamble, the Commonwealth was formed relying on the blessing of Almighty God, with the World War I fathers delivering that blessing to raise the land out of international waters and allowed Billy Hughes to speak for an independent and sovereign country forged in its own right. The practical guide on how to lay down a land claim can be found in the Holy Scriptures of the world. With the King James Bible 1611 enshrined into the creation of the Commonwealth, this Holy Scripture was used to lay claim and compass the realm at the Shrine of Remembrance. The shrine, built as a literal compass by watching the stars and following the practical guide held within the King James Bible 1611. That is why there is a biblical verse on the foundation stone, on the building, and why it is referred to as holy ground. The act of building the shrine following the Holy Scripture, creating an anchor point where the heavens are anchored to the land, as represented by the anchor on the door handle at the shrine. This being the anchor point for a newly formed kingdom, the Australian Imperial Crown Kingdom. If you think about what has just been stated and look around the world, you will see many stones placed down by many people that followed the practical guide within their Holy Scripture to make their holy land claim. In 1931, the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was renamed to that of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This newly adjusted Parliament passed the Statute of Westminster Act UK 1931, cutting off any dominion over the previously separated dominions of the realm. This stopped the Parliament of the United Kingdom, renamed, from making any newly formed legislation for the now wholly separated kingdoms. The Commonwealth of Australia takes specific mention within the Act, as does Canada, both major dominions of the realm. This newly found Kingdom of Australia gave way to the King's Domain and to a throne room being built in Government House in Melbourne for a monarch of the Australian Imperial Crown Kingdom to sit on. In 1936, King George V passed away. The practitioner that pronounced the king to be dead was Bertrand Dawson. His diary was made public in 1986, which details the death of King George V by lethal injection administered by himself. This gave rise to the rhyme, Lord Dawson of Penn has killed lots of men, so that's why we sing God Save the King. King Edward VIII was next in line to the throne, but he renounced it in 1936 before he was coronated. There's a surprising twist associated with this. He didn't just renounce the throne of the United Kingdom for himself, but also for his descendants. King George V was limited in what he could do during his time as king due to being under administration. but as head of the realm he was able to speak for the realm on an international level, ensuring the administrators played by the rules. Now that we have no head of the realm, we start to see a number of rapid changes that seek to undermine who we are as a people. What is the first thing you do to a people you want to undermine? You start a re-education program. In Geneva, 1937, Australia was signed into a treaty called the Declaration Regarding the Teaching of History, Revision of School Textbooks. This treaty called for the expediency of assigning as large a place as possible to the history of other nations and giving prominence in the teaching of world history. As stated in the treaty, the goal is to bring about a realization of the interdependence of nations and to protect school children from material that may put them on their guard against all such allegations and interpretations as might arouse unjust prejudice against other nations. In plain English, it is basically saying they plan on teaching people that sovereign, independent countries or kingdoms are bad, and reliant interdependent nation states are good. This treaty came into force in 1939, and so Australian school textbooks were changed. Worth noting is that this is an international treaty, so this happened in many countries around the world. The United Kingdom Prime Minister had declared war on the 3rd of September 1939, committing British forces to the task of fighting Germany with France as their initial ally. Within 3 hours, the then Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia, Robert Menzies, followed suit, declaring war from the Commonwealth of Australia in a speech in tune with the Prime Minister of the British Parliament. The defence of the realm was at play again, or so they thought. There was a problem in that the Prime Minister had declared warfare on behalf of a foreign realm without even considering the consequences of those actions. The Balfour Declaration divided what was once a realm into multiple realms. The Commonwealth of Australia was once Dominion, but now had found itself sovereign and self-proclaimed in its own right. Out of this blunder came the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act 1942, which is a carefully worded document because of the need to cover one's actions in relation to committing the Commonwealth of Australia Defence Forces, as well as His Majesty's ships of war, into a battle theatre in step with the Prime Minister of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Clause 4 of the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act 1942 opened the door for request and consent to be sent to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In 1944, the Australian Parliament passed the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organisation Act 1944, starting the process of food control within the country. What is interesting here is the United Nations was not an organisation at the time and was created 2 years later in 1946. The Australian government was able to forecast the creation of the United Nations, demonstrating its involvement in the League of Nations, which became the United Nations. Here we see the beginnings of what was to become Agenda 2130 and Sustainable Development, wherein the United Nations treats nation-states as factories that feed other nation-states, shipping agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and minerals around the world with policies that countries export their finest and import their requirements. As we have seen in the 1937 Re-Education Treaty, the goal of the treaty was to bring about a realization of the interdependence of nations, interdependence by exporting our finest and importing our requirements. With Australia running out of finance and choking on debt cycles of interest payments, we see Australia enter into agreement with the International Monetary Fund and led to the International Monetary Agreement Act 1947. This legislation reflects the decision to enter into financial agreement with a foreign organisation, a fund, which we have come to realise is a credit system. With the Commonwealth of Australia now borrowing money from the IMF, it quickly found itself under the thumb of the IMF or foreign interests. The Commonwealth of Australia was now at its limit of what it was able to pay, which gave way to the creation of a system of credit in which the labour of the economy itself is going to pay off the debts. changes to the allegiance of a people was required to bring about a situation of surety for a national debt wherein it is running out of things to offer as securities towards that national debt. This is where we see the Commonwealth of Australia start to make changes to the way nationality works, and we can see here in the Nationality and Citizenships Act of 1948 why. A trust territory is a territory or any part thereof, His Majesty's dominions under the trusteeship of the United Nations. This is a rather stark revelation, that the territories of the Commonwealth or states thereof are under the trusteeship of the United Nations. The importance of changes of people's allegiance through citizenship cannot be understated, as this is a large part of the problem. To see the effect the Nationality and Citizenship Act of 1948 had, we must first look at the difference between mankind, person, and human being. Although we use these words interchangeably these days, they have very different meanings. Mankind is a man or woman which is a creation of God and is pure. A person is the legal personality of a human being. A person is a persona or a mask put on to perform as an actor within the state. This actor is clothed with instruments of the state, like a birth certificate, licenses, and other state identification. A human being is of human birth or offspring, not having the shape of mankind, which cannot inherit any land. So, we can see that mankind is pure, and a person is the personality of a human being unable to inherit any land. This becomes interesting when we begin to consider the birthright left to us by Queen Victoria and what the Nationality and Citizenship Act of 1948 changed. We had a monarch take an oath to a kingdom, a body of people whom have taken oath through the name of the monarch to the kingdom, of which the monarch has by oath become the sovereign or head of. We know this by name to be the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, a kingdom of estates headed by Queen Victoria and left as birthright to her people, or those in oath of allegiance to that birthright or kingdom through allegiance to its monarch, their heirs and successors. Queen Victoria left the people of the kingdom a birthright to the land through an oath of allegiance to the kingdom through the monarch. These people were known as subjects of the imperial realm, and hence in World War I why Australia sent the imperial forces to defend the realm. Now, to have this birthright, one cannot be a person or a human being, as they cannot inherit land, but one must be mankind. Prior to the introduction of the Nationality and Citizenship Act of 1948, everyone within the Commonwealth was a subject of the Crown with allegiance to the imperial realm with an inherited birthright. When this act introduced the citizenship, the core of who we were as a people began to change. Australian citizens are persons that are registered with the state. As we have seen, persons cannot inherit land, and therefore our birthright to the land under our feet began to be undermined. Not being mankind anymore, but becoming persons registered with the state. The act of becoming a citizen requiring a pledge of loyalty to the state, removing any previous pledge to the imperial realm. The state had the parents of anyone born after the act pledge their child's life to the state via the act of filing for a birth certificate and registering them, making them a citizen from birth. In 1953, Queen Elizabeth II was coronated as head of the realm. But the question here is, what realm did Queen Elizabeth II take an oath to? To see this, we must first look at what heraldry is. As stated earlier, the profession is called heraldry, and in the UK, the college is called the College of Arms. They are responsible for devising, granting, and describing armorial bearings, tracing genealogies, and determining and ruling on questions of rank and protocol. Some heraldic tools that allow us to see what realm one serves are coats of arms, royal crowns, seals, and flags. We can see that Queen Elizabeth II was coronated under the St. Edward's crown, with the crown being a heraldic device that denotes an estate. This is not the crown of our father's estate, the St. Edward's crown being foreign to our realm and by extent foreign to us. We also see the oath taken by Queen Elizabeth II to be very different to the one taken by Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria took an oath to the realm, as Queen Elizabeth took an oath to a kingdom and several individually named countries along with possessions and territories. Australia is one of the countries named individually, but as we have seen, Australia is now a kingdom in its own right, and to become a monarch in Australia, one must now take coronation in Australia on the foundation stone. If we recall, the Balfour Declaration separated all previous dominions from England, including separating England from Ireland. Here we have Queen Elizabeth II taking coronation to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. If Great Britain and Ireland were separated, what exactly was Queen Elizabeth II taking coronation to? It was a coronation to a different realm of that of Queen Victoria, her heirs and successors. How we can tell that Queen Elizabeth II did indeed take an oath to a separate realm is the coat of arms and royal ensign has changed. Queen Elizabeth II's royal ensign has changed from Queen Victoria's royal ensign. The most dramatic change can be seen in the third canton, where on the harp, the angel with outstretched wings has been removed and replaced with what appears to be a Venus flytrap. This change of royal ensign specifies a change in armoury, which is a change in land. Here we can clearly see that Queen Elizabeth II is not the Queen of our realm, being the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and definitely not the Queen of the Kingdom of Australia. This created a problem for the Queen, as she had no authority in our realm, and out of this problem the Royal Powers Act 1953 was born to correct the issue. The Act was installed to give the authority of the Governor-General to the Queen. King Edward VII and King George V did not need Parliament to grant them power, as they were coronated to the realm, but with Queen Elizabeth II taking coronation to a foreign realm, the Parliament needed to pass an act to legislate power to her. Within a year of Queen Elizabeth II taking coronation, the old pool of remembrance was filled in and a large cross placed across our north line leaving the shrine. This was done to demonstrate the Catholic Church had encompassed our realm, in essence saying they now control it. Remember that flag that was installed under Admiralty Order in 1908? The Flags Act 1953 was passed legislating the use of the blue flag as a national flag, with the red to be known as the red ensign. Flags installed by the administrator under Admiralty Order being the administrator's flag, and by flying these flags showing the administrator you are loyal to them. The men and women of a realm continued to pledge their birthright into the nation's financial burdens in a scheme that was designed to never end. With the nation's debts increasing, the Reserve Bank Act 1959 was passed, along with the creation of the Reserve Bank of Australia. The Australian currency was heading for decimal to keep in line with administrators who would ledger the actions of the population as a trigger for trade, which is now essentially based wholly on the backs of the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, and in ledger through employment declarations and tax returns. The Currency Act 1965 was passed to begin the removal of precious metals from our coinage. The credit we had borrowed from the IMF after the 1947 IMF Act could no longer be paid back, and so coins of valuable metal began to be replaced with coins of worthless metal, and so all silver was removed from our coinage. After the collapse of silver, the gold-backed standard was next to be removed. The debt-sinking fund could no longer function as it was set up to do. Without the ability to pay debts in gold and silver, Nixon informed Whitlam that the removal of the gold-backed standard will occur for our currency in the Commonwealth of Australia, and that the Reserve Bank will now be backed by the US interest in oil, dubbed the petrodollar. This occurred in 1971 with the removal of the gold-backed standard and the installation of the petrodollar. Reserve currency notes initially had the wording Commonwealth of Australia printed on them, but post the removal of the gold standard, the notes ceased to display the words Commonwealth of, to reflect changes that the petrodollar is no longer wealth common, but now based on Australia's ability to help maintain oil interests. In 1967, the naval ensign of His Majesty's fleet in use throughout the Commonwealth of Australia was changed to be in line with the flag design in the Flags Act 1953, though not explicitly mentioned in it. This occurred after the Currency Act 1965 removed the value from the Commonwealth and the Reserve Bank Act 1959 was put into action, after the failure of the Commonwealth Bank to manage a debt sinking fund 1923, leading to a change in currency in 1966 and the removal of valuable metal from our coinage. This change in naval ensign demonstrated a loss of power and changed the very backbone of the Commonwealth of Australia Defence Force, now flying a flag in line with that of military orders on land warfare. The land and the sea now under a flag introduced at the visit of the United States Naval Fleet in 1908. On July 1, 1967, changes in the Australian postal system were introduced. In changes to the postal service, each district or suburb saw the addition of a postal code to its address. A name was now addressed at post by postal code, dividing the Commonwealth of Australia by number in line with the Universal Postal Union out of Geneva. Beneath the use of the postal code lies the remains of the role of the state in English law. Born from legislation of the state are council bodies. In a normal situation, a Lord Mayor takes on the duties of a council district by heading a panel of councillors or aldermen. The councillors oversee council wards and their wardens of council. In the background of these councils, we now see the addition of a general manager, CEO, or administrator that have taken control through usufruct. These subdivisions are found within the council district, in essence being the council estate, which in Old English terms was usually low-income housing provided by the state. The council sits monthly or fortnightly meetings with its Lord Mayor and councillors or aldermen who oversee the running of the council, its wards and wardens under the state. By literal reasoning, if one can be addressed at one's post through the postal code, by assumption of being one's person or liable to the debts enforced upon that person, and one's post lies within the jurisdiction of a ward within the boundaries of a council overseen by a warden or a councillor, then it could be presumed and assumed that by that reasoning the person or human or progenitor's birth could be seen as a ward of the state and in guardianship by the state. Why go to all this trouble over guardianship? We can see by Article 155 and 156 of the Libre Code that loyalty and disloyalty play a large part in the occupation and burden of war pushed upon the civilians of the Commonwealth of Australia under the rules of usufruct, being part of the truce or surrender between the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, the realms of the Imperial Crown and plenipotentiaries before treaties at Versailles, The Hague and Geneva. Why would loyalty free you from the stricter burdens of war? Consider that there is a silent war going on around us in the form of financial reparations, administration, and the use of the fruits. Most would not consider, but it would be prudent to state that loyalty would mean comprehending that one is occupied and that administration under the rules of usufruct is taking place. In knowing this, it would again be prudent to state that in that loyalty you would know the difference between belligerent, combatant, non-belligerent, and your role as a civilian in the theatre of war. And now defining the person as a human being under the guise of humanitarianism takes from mankind and creates humanity, denying the faith and the divinity of Christ to believe that Christ was merely a man. If a man were deemed to be incompetent or that of a bastard child without the right of inheritance, the state would take on the role of guardian of a ward of the state. The same would apply for those under the Lunacy Act of 1898 or imprisonment in Her Majesty's jail system. Mankind now subjugated to the realms of men and not the realm of God in the military occupation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. After over a century of conflict with the United States, the realms of God had been put into administration under the rules of usufruct, and the men of the realm, now disloyal to that realm, and considered without birthright and human, or beasts and monsters. In 1973, the Australian government became party to human rights agreements in the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which forms the basis for human rights within the nation-state of Australia. It is important to note that the Bill of Rights 1688 is still relevant in Australia once we step into the imperial realm, and human rights is an attempt to undermine your indubitable Bill of Rights 1688 with a lesser form of rights. The government had also signed into the Unidroit Treaty of Rome, essentially handing the equitable title of the mineral and energy wealth of Australia to a foreign power seated in Rome. Royal Style and Title 1973 was then enacted in the newly formed Australian government, and the way the Queen was addressed changed within the Commonwealth of Australia, but something was going on that doesn't come to the foreground. Unbeknown at the time was the fact that secret meetings had taken place between Queen Elizabeth II and Gough Whitlam, both here in the Commonwealth of Australia and abroad in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Some of the key issues at stake were the nationality of the Commonwealth of Australia by way of changes to the Oath of Allegiance, changed from being in allegiance to a realm into being in allegiance with a nation-state, and following changes to the national anthem, parliamentary oath, oath of office, and the introduction of the Order of Australia. Following this, we saw the removal of the definition of the Australian government, foreign country and trust territory from the newly formed Australian Citizenship Act 1973. In the changes, all references to His Majesty's government are removed, and what is nationality is now full citizenship. In the changes, we notice that the line of authority has been defined differently in the introduction of Acts of Parliament, and that the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia is now shortly titled the Australian Government. Changes to the Acts Interpretation Act 1973 occurred, and of key importance is the removal of the Commonwealth of in the title of Australia, and that the Queen is no longer referred to as Her Most Gracious Majesty the Queen, and merely the Queen. In 1974, Whitlam had visited the United States after legal aid was established to reinforce the force of law, now being pushed throughout the Commonwealth of Australia. Changes to the way the Parliament addressed the Queen had taken place, as evident in the titles to act passed by the Parliament, and the coats of arms reflected this difference. Essentially, what had just occurred was an entity was created called the Australian Government that was separate but mimicked the de jure Commonwealth of Australia government. In 1975, Gough Whitlam's government was removed by the then Governor-General due to not having any people to serve, as everyone had left the Commonwealth and joined the foreign realm via the citizenship. The Australia Act 1986 was requested through the states, given consent, and then requested through the Commonwealth to the United Kingdom for consent. Why were the states of the Commonwealth of Australia requesting the Australia Act 1986? The first line of the Act demonstrates that the request was made to two separate entities, with the first being the Parliament and the second being the Government. The Act was sent to the UK Parliament and was passed in 1986, but a different version of the Act was passed in Australia in 1985. Does the UK not need to pass the Act before the Australian Government does? As in the first line, the request was made to two separate entities, one of which was the Australian Government that was created in 1973 through secret meetings. And what was requested was for the states to be able to join the Australian Government. Worth noting that the Australia Act 1986 would never have come about if it weren't for the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act 1942, opening for request and consent to be sent to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. From the moment we became occupied in 1910, there have been a set of rules that we have been required to follow. One of those rules being Hague 4 War on Land Article 55, which refers to the use of public buildings, land, forests and agriculture by the administrator in accordance with the rules of usufruct. What are the rules of usufruct? The rules of usufruct allow for the use of the fruits, and the fruits of one labor or the fruits of one loins are then put into the system that is that usufruct. That very system then catalogues and puts value on what is contained within the realm that has been occupied. The occupied as a people are still free to do their day-to-day activities unless they challenge the position of the administration that allowed this usufruct or use of the fruits to occur in the first place. Challenging the position of this administration is seen to be belligerent and can open up a whole plethora of defense tactics, including military intervention and use of severely militarized police using ancient battle tactics. We see under usufruct that administrators can use our public assets to help pay off the debt. You see this in your daily lives, paying rates on your own paid off parcels of land. You pay registration yearly like a right has been turned into a privilege. You are fined, and the consequences always relate to churning the financial wheel that keeps the system of credit running. Use of the fruits lines you up with credit you churn to pay off, with your children handed into the game to continue the credit cycle they become surety to. You can see this directly by way of privatization of government-owned resources and infrastructure that provide services to the people. In 2019, this usufruct agreement came to an end, and had the people been on the land and known who they were, the administrator should have left the realm. But as there was no people on the land, we have now gone into what is known as the merger of usufruct. The administrator begins the process of merging all assets in usufruct in an attempt to claim ownership. Looking through history, we see a game of cat and mouse between two faiths over hundreds of years. Many people hear the word faith and are conditioned to think in terms of religion. Faith is a belief system, and when we talk faith, we are talking in terms of faith in natural common law, the Ten Commandments, your father's living estate. When we talk faith in foundation, we are saying faith in the natural common law that stems from the King James Bible 1611. This is the basis for all laws in the imperial realm, and what the will and testament of our fathers stems from. This makes the King James Bible 1611 the highest law book in the imperial realm. Now the problem we have is a foreign faith is here in our realm. If our faith is based on the living estate, this faith is based on the dead estate. The fictional world, built upon our living world, full of man's laws, this is the Roman faith that is here on our land and has enslaved us all. Currently, Roman canon law is being administered in our parliaments. This Roman canon law is the administration law of the Roman Catholic Church and makes up statute laws, policies, and mandates that you must follow, harming or penalizing you if you don't. By administering these laws in our parliaments, we have set up religion and church in the management of our father's estate, which is in direct violation of section 116 of the de jure will and testament or constitution of our father's estate. In common law world, this is known as public versus private, law of the land versus law of the sea, armory versus admiralty. Both of these systems are explained in the Holy Scriptures of the world. These Holy Scriptures sit above both of these systems, and is known as the law of the air. In the beginning there was nothing, then water, then land and water. This is the most basic level of law, and all law was built on this. When the Commonwealth was created, the will and testament of our father's estate was based on the King James Bible 1611. When the foundation stone was laid, the land was lifted out of international waters as a kingdom in its own right. The shrine built around the stone using the King James Bible 1611 to compass the realm, making the King James Bible 1611 the highest law book in this land, and why the King James Bible 1611 can be found in the Parliament to this day. What we can see is the King James Bible 1611 is a law book that explains how living men and women can raise land out of the Holy Dead Sea. The King James Bible 1611 explains both the living faith and the deceased faith. It warns to stay on the living land and out of the Dead Sea. Paul in the King James Bible 1611 was one of the greatest litigators, and is who you should study if you want to be a litigator. Here we have 4 verses from the Bible, 3 of which talk about trading and not respecting the person of the Admiralty, and 1 telling you how to be a community with different religions at home, but loyal to the Father's estate. Religious institutions that teach morals and don't explain the practical application of the Holy Scriptures and their importance in international law, as law is foundationally ecclesiastical, are only used to control and divide men, all while truly hiding God. We have seen Australia and America fall into administration, and there are many other countries in the same situation. We see the promotion of interdependence on other nations in an attempt to undermine the very sovereignty of countries, and the increased control of federal affairs by foreign powers to the realm. Interdependence being so important as to change the country's history books to promote interdependence and re-educate the populace with these edited history books. We clearly see this happening through our history with the continual free trade agreements being signed, the shutdown of manufacturing in the country, the increased export of all our resources, and the increased import of all our needs. Now that we have seen the Commonwealth's history as probably never before, we can see some major issues within the realm. How do we get out of this mess? Firstly, recognize that we are an occupied people and live on a battlefield, and learn our history by reading Stephen Spire's white papers. Once you understand our history, begin to read some relevant treaties. 2 good ones to start with are Hague 4 War on Land, which outlines the rules we and the occupying force must follow, and Liberacode, which is the occupying force's procedural guidelines. By reading and comprehending what is in these treaties, we will see that as long as we stay in peace, we are to be granted certain rights. There are different roles played in the theatre of warfare, and you must learn the difference and how to play the role of a peaceful civilian. For peaceful civilians, belligerents, and combatants all have a role to play in the theatre of war, and if you do not know the difference, you can quickly move from one role to the next, with each role afforded different rights. As we saw earlier in the presentation, everyone fell under guardianship of the state in 1967, with the introduction of the postcode system. We are a ward of the state, children unable to look after ourselves, and when we go out and protest, the administrator look at us and see a bunch of whining children complaining. When we fill out petitions to petition the government to take an action, what the administrator sees is a bunch of children begging for change. We need to stop whining and begging like children and to peacefully start standing up in self-determination. As a community, we need to stand up in unity and raise the red land flag of the Commonwealth and start looking after one another. As we have seen, flags demonstrate who you are on a battlefield, and so we need to raise the same red land flag to demonstrate that we are united as imperial subjects of the Commonwealth of Australia. This flag was consecrated in all capital cities of the Commonwealth on Friday the 31st of July 2020 by brave men and women standing in faith under the imperial realm. We cannot do what we have seen happen at protests, where the whining children raise 50 different national flags, displaying there is no unity among the group and validating to the administrator the need for guardianship, as the people do not know who they are, with no loyalty to the Anzac, their forefathers, who lay out a realm for them. We must remain loyal to each other, to the Anzac sacrifice, and to the realm. When citizens raise the blue national flag installed by the administrator in 1908 and legislated in 1953, they are demonstrating loyalty to the administrator, with loyalty and disloyalty playing a very large role in the core of being an occupied people. When we became occupied, the people were divided into combatants and non-combatants, and then further classified into loyal and disloyal, with disloyal getting classified into sympathizers and supporters of the occupying force. Loyalty is loyalty to the gods of your fathers, being the Anzac, as the sons of the Commonwealth. Article 155 and 156 of the Liberacode state that the burdens of warfare are to be pushed on the disloyal citizen, while protecting the loyal citizen from the difficulties of war. By not honouring the gods of your fathers as the sons of the Commonwealth through the Shrine of Remembrance and the local cenotaphs in your town, We are being disloyal and is why the burdens of war is pushed on all of us. Through this review we have discussed how the Commonwealth was founded on a foundation stone, under the King James Bible 1611. To be loyal to the Commonwealth you must honour that foundation stone and that faith, but that can be done through all religious texts. That stone can be honoured through the Quran or through the Torah or any other number of religious books, as all the books have the practical guide in them of how to make a land claim. The important thing is to honour the foundation stone and the faith through your religious texts, just as if we travel overseas to other countries, we honour the religion of their land through our faith, and by extent the law of their land. We now know the country is broke, and with the credit system currently in place we are getting further into debt with every RBA note printed and circulated. The solution to this is one of the biggest hurdles to get over, but also one of the most important. RBA notes are bills of exchange following the rules of the Bills of Exchange Act 1909. Anyone can write a bill of exchange following the rules of the Act. A bill of exchange is basically an IOU with a promise to pay later. We slave for and trade IOUs every day, but the notes themselves hold no value, but a promise. We can read the Act and start to write our own bills of exchange and honour our promises to each other. As stated in our 1900 Constitution, we are to pay all debts in gold and silver. We must start to trade real value amongst ourselves, and write and honour our own bills of exchange if we are to get out of the debt problem in this Commonwealth. Moving away from the RBA is the only way out. Now we get to the root of the problem. Councils. Councils now have CEOs who work for the administrator, administering all of us. And even though we see the mayors of these councils rotated every 3 to 4 years, the CEOs stay in place and run the show. Within these councils we all purchase land, and once it is paid off we think we own the land, but this is not the case. What we have is tenancy in usufruct, as the occupancy of that land. This is easily seen on the rates notice that gets sent to your person with the word occupant on it and not owner. That rates notice is a burden of warfare, as are all the notices handed out by policy enforcers, enforcing policy on a disloyal population. What has happened to all land in councils is the councils have put all our land into land abeyance, in which the land is in limbo and the ownership of the land has not been determined. As there is no technical owner identified, the administrator believes that it owns the land. In the past, land was managed by the local parish, and the parish would hold a record of all the land lots and the owners. A parish was a local town hall that served as a meeting place and managed the local district. Each district also had a bishop as a spiritual observer and father of the district as a link to the foundation stone. When children grew into adults, the parish would allocate them a lot of land to start a family on. All of this was recorded on what was known as a Burgess Register, or a Burgess Roll, that was held within the parish. In 1974, all the Burgess registers were handed to the federal government, who currently manages all the land. Our councils, who have occupied our parishes by this time, had all gone bankrupt, and in doing so had given away all our land titles, making us tenants in usufruct. The next thing to consider is defence in our towns. In World War I, the people of the town, mostly farmers, volunteered to leave our shores and defend the town from a foreign realm. The men of our towns were our Imperial Defence Force and our land force that fought for the liberty of the Commonwealth. Our current defence force is filled with persons, and their person is paid for their service working for an Admiralty force. This is not only the defence force, but also the police force that is pushing burdens of war on a disloyal people. Historically, boys would enter scouts and learn to live off the land and defend themselves, and women would join the Country Women's Association to unite and care for the community. Boys would grow into men and become the land forces of this country. These land forces would then be armed by the council to be able to defend the town from a foreign invasion. What did we see happen in 1996 when all guns were taken away? The land forces of the Commonwealth were disarmed. Our councils have not only given away all our land and disarmed our land forces, but continue to increase the debts in our councils by continuing to take RBA notes and pushing an ever-increasing burden of war on all the wards in that council. What we need to do is to grow up and stop being whining wards begging for change, and go to our councils and let them know that we have grown up and do not need them to nanny us anymore. And importantly, this must be done in peace and abide by the relevant treaties. Once we stand up and look at this matter, we will see that many politicians will be able to be charged with war crimes, with the Hague Principles being broken for a start. If we start to read and comprehend these treaties, we will see that in Hague 4, Article 56, public worship must be granted. If you fly our red land flag as a united people in a group, publicly worshipping the fathers that lay down their lives in the creation of a kingdom, the police are obligated by this treaty to leave you be regardless of what the state or administrating government have proclaimed. To not allow this would be to commit a war crime. We also see that Article 43 of the Libra Code does not allow slavery, and once we step up and say that this is slavery and this is why, they cannot attempt to enslave us again, and the US military is obligated to assist if necessary. We need to ask our local Lord Mayors, where are our land titles, where are our Burgess registers, what is their line of authority, why is there a CEO, and where are the guns to defend the towns? These questions are only the start, and as we learn more, new questions should be asked. We need the Mayor and all public servants to serve the people again, but this will only happen if we grow up, stop being nannied, and peacefully start taking control of our councils. This can only happen by returning to the imperial realm. Once the Mayor is serving the people again, we need a bishop at the local parish to recreate a Burgess register and take ownership of the land as a congregation of people. A congregation is not a group of people in a building, but all the people on their lots of land in that district. And as we currently have no Commonwealth government, we will need to elect new representatives under the Constitution to represent the people at a federal level. We know that governments trade bonds, with these bonds linked to the birth certificate system, being slave bonds of consensual slaves. They literally trade slave bonds that they got everyone to sign up to via deception and deceit, with all this done in matters of war and peace. If you don't want to be a consensual slave, and don't want your children to be a consensual slave, we need to unite as one people and step back into the Australian Imperial Crown Kingdom as loyal subjects to the Crown that gives us liberty. We have seen not only the history of the Commonwealth, but peeked at how faith and Holy Scriptures play a major role in international law through the holy seas of the world. A sea that all men are in and must gather together in faith to be able to raise holy land out of this sea, land that they lay claim to and then have the right to defend. 2019 signalled the end of usufruct, and was when the administration no longer had the right to use our land and assets, and should have left. But as there was no one left in the Imperial Kingdom, they stayed to guardian all the persons on their citizenship. This resulted into us falling into the merger of usufruct, where this administration is merging all the assets and taking ownership of them. They will push us into further enslavement with greater financial burdens, a push for a republic, and a possible depression to force this onto people. The end of usufruct is what they call the Great Reset, and there will be a new system put in place once they remove our naked ownership of the land, where the people, also known as Crown, will own nothing and be happy. If we look in the Bible, we see that God made man and woman naked in the garden, of which they had dominion. They ate the fruit of the forbidden tree and clothed themselves. Once clothed, God threw them out of the garden into a place of hardship. Here, the garden is the realm that we were thrown out of for being disloyal to our gods, and the clothing is all the state identification issued to the person, including the person itself. What is important is that we are the naked owners of this land, and that ownership sits underneath the usufruct. If we as a people shed these items of clothing and honor our gods, returning to the realm, we will be back in the Garden of Eden that was laid down for us to have dominion. As Australia leads the way back to the imperial realm, so can New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, and many other countries in the same realm as Australia. Your religion might be your dream time. It might be Judaism. It might be Christianity. It might be Catholicism. It might be Muslim. But all these religions have the same faith at their core. Faith that we are all living men and women that look after our neighbors as a community and were put on this earth by God. There are many people of many different beliefs within our Father's estate, of which they are free to practice, just not within the management of our Father's estate. What religion is practiced on your own lots of land is irrelevant, as long as you stand under the ensign of our Father's estate. Individually, you only have the right to the status of prisoner of war, but as a united people, you have the right of self-determination. My church is my Father's imperial crown estate and kingdom. My congregation is my neighbors, my fellow brothers and sisters, standing self-determined on their own camps, their own houses, their own lots, under their own standards, in my Father's estate and under the ensign of my Father's house. Raise your land war flag and know that you're a non-belligerent, peaceful, united, loyal, and solid people together.